Tonight on All In.
The court has denied Trump's argument.
The D.C. Circuit Court makes its ruling.
For the purpose of this criminal case, former President Trump has become Citizen Trump.
Citizen Trump should stand trial for January 6th.
This is a unanimous body blow to each and every one of Donald Trump's arguments.
Tonight, special coverage with Rachel Maddow and Lawrence O'Donnell on what today's decision means and what happens next.
Having immunity is so important, and I hope the Supreme Court has the courage to do that.
Legal analysis with Lisa Rubin, Katie Fang, Harry Littman and Joyce Vance, and David Plouffe on a frontrunner running to stay out of jail.
I love that beautiful woman right there with a mugshot.
Plus, Congressman Adam Schiff on the trial of Donald Trump and the spectacular failure of House Republicans.
The nays are 216. The resolution is not adopted.
All In starts right now. Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Welcome to a special edition of All In on an enormously consequential day for American rule of law and democracy. Just a moment, I'll be joined by my good friends Rachel Maddow and Lawrence O'Donnell to discuss today's landmark ruling by a federal appeals court against Donald Trump. In a unanimous opinion, the three-judge panel of the D.C. Appellate Court ruled that Donald Trump is not immune from being criminally prosecuted for his attempt to steal the 2020 election and overthrow our democracy. It is a thorough defeat for the ex-president, clearing the way for his trial for those alleged crimes to proceed, barring an intervention by the Supreme Court, which we will, of course, get to in a moment. In their lengthy opinion, the judges explained, quote, "For the purpose of this criminal case, former President Trump has become Citizen Trump, with all the defenses of any other criminal defendant. Any executive immunity that may have protected him while he served as president no longer protects him against this prosecution." Of course, Citizen Trump has been charged on 4 felony counts related to his attempt to steal the election, including conspiracy to defraud the United States. Special counsel Jack Smith brought those charges last summer, and the case was assigned to District Judge Tanya Chutkan, who has been very clear about her desire to move the case along quickly, arguing that there is a societal interest in providing a speedy trial. She scheduled the trial to begin on March 4th. But of course, Donald Trump wants to delay as much as possible in the hopes that he can win an election, land back in the White House before a trial can even begin, where he can dismiss this case, right, from his perch as the guy who tells the Department of Justice what to do. And so to that end, he launched an appeal. Now, this is a sort of a crucial thing to understand. It's one of the very few kinds of appeals that are allowed before the trial even starts in a federal criminal case. It's called an interlocutory appeal. It means you're appealing before they even try you, right? And in this appeal, he claims that he has absolute immunity, that he cannot even be tried, right? That he can't even stand trial. He can't be prosecuted for anything he did while he was the president. This appeal was, from the beginning, clearly a kind of legal Hail Mary to prevent the trial from starting next month. It's been pretty clear from the start he absolutely should lose on the merits. In fact, Judge Chutkan considered this appeal and swiftly rejected Trump's initial motion to dismiss the charges against him. He then brought his claim to the appeals court. That's one level above Judge Chutkan, putting the whole case on hold while those judges considered his legally dubious argument. Now, there's some complicated stuff about jurisdiction in the opinion, but you do not have to be a lawyer to appreciate how plainly Trump's claim clashes with the most basic structure of our democratic government.
Could a president order SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival? That's an official act in order to SEAL Team 6?
He would have to be and would speedily be, impeached and convicted before the criminal prosecution.
What if he weren't? There would be no criminal prosecution, no criminal liability for that?
Chief Justice's opinion in Marbury against Madison and our constitutional tradition and the plain language of the impeachment judgment clause all clearly presuppose that what the founders were concerned about was not.
I asked you a yes or no question. Could a president who ordered SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival who was not impeached, would he be subject to criminal prosecution?
if he were impeached and convicted first. And
so your answer is no.
My answer is qualified yes. There's a political process that would have to occur under the structure of our Constitution, which would require impeachment and conviction by the Senate.
So you gotta get impeachment and conviction before you could stand trial for having SEAL Team 6 kill your political rival. That was a month ago. And of course, a former president and what basically they ruled today is that a former president cannot commit a crime while in office and never face any legal consequences. The ruling takes down each of Trump's claims. One of his main assertions is that the prospect of being prosecuted would, quote, inhibit a sitting president's ability to act fearlessly and impartially. Basically, it would make it too hard to do the job. He would be too stressed to be president. The court counters that every other president in history has somehow managed it. Quote, past presidents have understood themselves to be subject to impeachment and criminal liability, at least under certain circumstances, so the possibility of chilling executive action is already in effect. And former presidents clearly knew they were not, quote, wholly immune from criminal liability. For instance, just look at Gerald Ford's pardon of Richard Nixon, which both former presidents evidently believed was necessary to avoid Nixon's post-resignation indictment. The court also argues there is an important deterrent effect that would be lost if presidents were totally immune from criminal prosecution. Quote, instead of inhibiting the president's lawful discretionary action, the prospect of federal criminal liability might serve as a structural benefit to deter possible abuses of power and criminal behavior. In other words, maybe we want to have a system that incentivizes those in power, like the president, to think twice about whether they're committing a felony before they do something. Am I doing a crime? This is a felony. Should we do this? And of course, our system is built as three co-equal branches of government. The president is the head of just one of them. He is not above the other two. He is certainly not above the law. Quote, former President Trump's stance would collapse our system of separated powers by placing the president beyond the reach of all three branches. Presidential immunity against federal indictment would mean that, as to the president, the Congress could not legislate, the executive could not prosecute, the judiciary could not review. We cannot accept that the office of the presidency places its former occupants above the law for all time thereafter. The appeals court gave Donald Trump and his lawyers a deadline of February 12th, that's next Monday, to appeal this decision to the highest court in the land, the Supreme Court. That's the last step. And he says he will do that. And then it will be up to the Supreme Court justices to decide if they want to take up his case. They don't have to at all. In fact, they reject most cases that are presented to them. If they say no, which is a possibility, then this ruling just stands. And Judge Chutkan can get the trial back on her schedule and at her discretion and basically go ahead. If the Supreme Court does decide to hear Trump's case, then he will have secured another delay. Now, again, the merits of the case remain the same. His argument is incredibly flimsy, almost insultingly so. And he most likely will not win. I don't think there's 5 votes on that court for this fakakta nonsense. But the clock will be running. And that, of course, is the entire point. I'm joined now by Rachel Maddow, host of The Rachel Maddow Show, and Lawrence O'Donnell, host of The Last Word. All right, let me get first sort of top-line reactions from you, Rachel, to the court's decision today.
Well, first of all, just kudos on fakakta nonsense at the end of the A block was just, I aspire to end up there at the end of a monologue, an explanatory one like this. I think, Chris, that the thing that was interesting to me about this ruling was that from the very beginning, you're right that there is complicated jurisdictional stuff. There's stuff that lawyers will get that other people won't get in here. But from the very beginning, it was very blunt on stuff that there's been an effort to be fuzzy about by people in the political arena. It says at the very outset of the ruling, there was not a peaceful transition of power. The reason the Congress was attacked, that resulted from Trump's rally, from which thousands of people then marched to the Capitol and attacked Congress. It's very blunt about those things. It calls it an unprecedented assault on our system of government. It's just very blunt about these things that there have been efforts to obfuscate. And I thought that was helpful. But I also just thought it was helpful, I think, for us as a country in talking about this, that they did outright mock the claims that you have to be impeached and convicted in the Senate before you could be put on trial for committing murder or committing any of these other crimes. And And I think that it's good that they basically rebutted what I think of as the common sense claim here, which is that other presidents like Richard Nixon, like even Bill Clinton, like other presidents in their real lives have shown, even Trump in his presidency has shown and has articulated that they knew they could be put on trial after they were out of office. They've all known it. It's a common sense thing that many presidents have conceded, including Trump himself while he was being impeached. And those things, I think, they just operate in the public sphere as well as they operate in the law. And we really need that. We need that from the judiciary right now so people really understand what's going on here.
Yeah, there's two places in particular they make those citations. So the Nixon-Ford example, which I think is the most famous to all of us, it was the biggest story in the country at the time that Ford was prospectively pardoning Richard Nixon, and literally everyone in the country understood that the reason he was doing that and the reason Nixon was accepting it is because he was probably going to be indicted and face criminal prosecution. But there's also Bill Clinton cutting a deal on his way out the door of the White House to basically have his law license suspended in exchange, basically, for not being prosecuted. Another point at which, clearly he thought it was possible. And then, Rachel, to your point, they also cite Trump's own lawyers at his impeachment trial, which I thought was interesting, whether that was going to make it into the opinion, saying, doesn't say you can't go indict the guy. I mean, literally, his other lawyers, different lawyers, say that. So, yeah, all three of those examples, which I think are sort of common sense historical examples rather than like arcane legal ones, are, in the opinion, very persuasive. Lawrence, what do you think?
Yeah, so we're talking about President Bill Clinton, Yale Law School graduate. President Richard Nixon, Duke Law School graduate. Okay, they firmly believe that the president can absolutely be charged with crimes, certainly after leaving office. And so this is one of those opinions that says to America, it says to every high school history student in America, you're not crazy. It's what you thought.
Yes,
it's what we've always thought for the entire history of the Republic. This is the way it is. And if we think back to the beginning of this case, there wasn't a single legal pundit, there wasn't anybody in the right wing anywhere saying, oh, well, you can't indict him. He's completely immune. This notion had never even been advanced by anyone until Trump's lawyers decided to advance it in this case. And so, I mean, it kind of took everyone by surprise in how outrageous it was. And what you have here now is the proof that there is a very big difference between what we call a novel case, which is this interesting issue that has never floated up all the way to the Supreme Court.
Which is Thursday, I think it's fair to say. Yes.
And a crazy case, which has absolutely no conceivable basis.
Yeah, and in some ways I almost felt like it's sort of a strange thing to read the opinion because it's incredibly persuasive, Rachel, and very thorough and goes through a bunch of stuff. But at some level it was like, the essential point was so ludicrous that it almost made me mad that this is the way the system works. And it's important that the system work its way through. But there was almost some sense, and it was like, right, of course, as they went through every example, as they cited chapter and verse, as they, limbed the lines of executive authority jurisprudence from Marbury to Youngstown and on and on and on, it was like, yes. This is precisely what it looks like, to Lawrence's point.
Yes, and it's what we've all known was true all along. And you're trying to say that this is, that we shouldn't believe our lying eyes, and the presidency has always been something different. Here's all the ways in which that's not true. That's absolutely right. I will say that the other piece of this that I was just pleased to read. Is that there is an element of the defense that Trump has mounted, both in public relations, both as a public relations matter, but also as a legal matter to some extent. And I think of it as the mirrored sunglasses problem. Like, do we really want to be a country in which some lieutenant colonel in mirrored sunglasses has every incentive to hold on to power for his entire natural life? Because the expectation is that once you're no longer holding the reins of power, you're going to be prosecuted by your political enemies and by your political successors. I mean, it sucks to be a country where former presidents get prosecuted, because that's a lousy thing about countries in which that's a regular regular dynamic in which those prosecutions are politically motivated and they're junk prosecutions, but they're used for political purposes. Trump has made that case both in the courtroom and outside the courtroom, and I've always felt like it's his strongest point. Obviously, the solution to that as a country is don't elect fricking criminals to be presidents. But you also got the judges today in the D.C. Circuit arguing against it and saying, listen, we have ways in our system of dealing with meritless and harassing prosecution. We have systems within our judiciary that prevent that. And so the idea that once you're prosecuted for crimes, you're going to then prosecute and everybody's going to prosecute people for nothing from here on out. No, the judiciary is here to make sure that doesn't happen. And we know that it won't. And seeing that asserted by this panel of judges, to me, actually made me feel better about that problem for the first time since this whole merry-go-round started spinning around.
Yeah, and I agree with that. There's something that he says along those lines about what this will bring about that I want to talk about, because I think it's both a defense, but it's a threat. Yeah. Very, very plainly a threat about what's going to happen.
Yes.
So if you guys would stick around, we have a lot to get to tonight. Former January 6th committee member Congressman Adam Schiff is here, plus David Plouffe on what this all means, the 24 election. We have a team of incredible lawyers who are still poring over this decision and what it means. That's all ahead. Don't go anywhere. In its unanimous decision that Donald Trump is not immune from criminal prosecution, the three-judge panel from the D.C. Court of Appeals writes, quote, "We cannot accept former President Trump's claims that a president has unbounded authority to commit crimes that would neutralize the most fundamental check on executive power, the recognition and implementation of election results." Still with me tonight, Rachel Maddow and Lawrence O'Donnell. Lawrence, I want to just read this Truth Social post. Do we have that from the last block? Maybe that just got taken away from me. Basically, Trump has been saying time and time again that if there's no immunity, then every president, to Rachel's point in the previous block, then every president will face prosecution afterwards. And that always reads to me as an obvious threat. I mean, it seems to me he's saying not just, can we show that Truth Social post? Blah, blah, that must have full immunity in order to, a president will be afraid to act. I know from personal experience, even our elections will be corrupted and under siege, so bad, so dangerous for a nation, save presidential immunity. Basically, he's saying, like, I'm going to prosecute Joe Biden if I'm elected. That's the way those always read to me.
Yeah, I wasn't reading it as that future thing. I was just reading it as the kind of dumb Trump idea about the way the world works. But you're absolutely right. He's saying this absolutely allows me to do it. I'll do it. What's so striking about it is that, as the court points out in the opinion, one thing that matters when you say, if this happens, then this will happen. You know, I mean, what meteorology is interested in is, hey, if it comes up this way, if the track is this way, this will happen. How do we know that? Oh, because we've been studying it for 100 years. We have a couple of 100 years of this not happening. Yes. A couple of 100 years. And the court was very impressed. The court says we're really impressed with a couple of 100 years of this absolutely not happening when the presidents believed that it could. I mean, you can go into these presidencies and discover that, yes, Franklin Roosevelt was worried that this idea might be against the law. Yes. Therefore, he won't do it. Harry Truman was worried that seizing the steel mills could be against the law, but he did it, and he found out it was against the law, and he couldn't do it. You know, they've always been worried about, is this against the law, and can I do it?
There's also this really interesting section, Rachel, where it's not just the history of the presidency, but they also do this analogizing to other positions. And there's a few different examples, right? Juries, right? Like jurors, we need them to make tough calls and use their discretion. But like, there's stuff that they could do that would be criminal in their official duty. Like if someone paid them to vote a certain way, that would be criminal. Judges have to make a ton of tough calls. You know that justices we're writing for. But also, judges can be prosecuted, and it all seems to work out. Like, members of Congress have to make tough discretionary calls about what's legal, what's not, like, also can be prosecuted. They sort of go through all these other examples, like, yeah, there's all these people that have to do difficult stuff, make tough calls about what the law is, and none of them are rendered immune.
Right. And they go back to cases from the 30s. They go through all of those different examples. They go through all these different presidential examples that we just talked about, including, again, most famously, why did Ford need to pardon Nixon? It says in the proclamation, As a result of certain acts or omissions occurring before his resignation from the office of president, Richard Nixon has become liable to possible indictment and trial for offenses against the United States, right? Like, it wasn't something we had to, like, read into their state of mind. Like, it's explicit in the proclamation. Everybody knows that after a president leaves office, he or she can be indicted, and that has always been baked in to what presidents have done. So this idea that it'll be a new thing and it will make all presidents afraid and timid, they both disprove it in the law, and they disprove it historically, and they disprove it in a way that just makes sense to the average American who isn't a lawyer, who's trying to understand what's happening with this very radical thing going on in Republican Party politics, trying to put this guy on the ballot again.
Yeah, and to that point about public audience, judicial audience, right? Because there are two throughout all this, and there's, you know, they're very frank about sort of different sort of interest at play, right? Presidential interest to act with some latitude in a difficult job, the public interest in making sure that people don't try to, like, overturn elections and foment violent coups on the Capitol, which they talk about. Now we've got this question about the public interest of this thing getting to trial. So here's the timing. They say the clerk, meaning the court clerk, is directed to withhold issuance of the mandate. That's basically the sort of possession of the case back to Judge Tanya Chutkan through February 12th, 2024. And then within that period, the appellant notifies the clerk in writing he's filed an application to the Supreme Court. The clerk is directed to withhold issuance of the mandate pending the Supreme Court's final disposition of the application, which means it now goes to the court, which has a monumental decision, both on the merits but also on the timing.
Yeah, the Supreme Court is faced with a strange one here. If this was any other litigant, they wouldn't take it. It just it's a preposterous claim. An appeals court is dealing effectively with a completely preposterous claim. And so the only reason to take it is, well, it's presidential, so maybe we should weigh in. But they have to know that they're going to have SEAL Team 6 in the hearing in the Supreme Court. It's not going to be one question about SEAL Team 6. You know, there are going to be several judges who have an opportunity to question about Donald Trump's ability to have as many Supreme Court justices as he wants executed so that he can get the opinions he wants out of the Supreme Court, and he cannot be prosecuted for that if he also executes enough United States senators so that he cannot be found guilty in an impeachment trial.
Yeah,
and so there's a circus. The Supreme Court knows, oh, my God, there's a horrible, stupid circus coming our way. All we have to do is deny cert.
Well, and it contrasts a little bit with the position of the case, its posture, Rachel, going forward, right? Because the case they're going to hear on Thursday, they had to take, basically. I think we would all sort of all agree, right? Like, Colorado kicked the guy off the ballot. So did Maine. Other states aren't. There's got to be the highest court in the land is going to be the one that's ultimately going to give us a constitutional ruling on this. They had to get involved. In this one, to Lawrence's point, they simply don't.
Right. And the mechanics of how that happens, though, end up being important. I mean, you only need 4 Supreme Court justices to say, yes, we want to hear it, which means you need, I mean, you don't need a majority. You only need 4. It's easy to imagine them coming up with the 4, even if it is impossible to imagine them deciding on the merits in Trump's favor. And so do they want to take the case? They don't have to agree to have an incredibly radical, stupid ruling in order to do Donald Trump a big favor here. They just have to agree to hear it and then go slow. And hope that Trump gets elected, in which case all these cases go away. And that seems to me, I mean, I don't know what we should expect from this Supreme Court. It's amazing they're going to get the disqualification issue on Thursday and the immunity issue on Monday. I don't know what to expect for them, but certainly if they want to help Trump here, they have lots of ways to do it.
Yeah, and we should also say that this court's posture has been an incredibly imperious and greedy one about what they get to say on what issues of public life they get to say. They have been sort of sticking their noses in all kinds of places. They've been telling executive agencies that they get to say. They've been telling Congress that it delegated things called major questions, even though there's no sort of constitutional doctrine. They've invented it. So they seem to be a court, at least the sort of conservative majority, that is very much a court that's like, we're going to say. And I think that kind of sense of sort of their own kind of grandeur and importance, it's very hard for me to see them to your point, Lawrence, I think they don't want the mess, but they also want to be we're the ones who say.
And they're the most unpredictable Supreme Court of our lifetimes.
Yes, I mean, particularly on the question of precedent, which is what this entire opinion rests solely on, which is also sort of somewhat worrying. Rachel Maddow, Lawrence O'Donnell, what a pleasure to have you both off the top here.
Let's do this all the time.
You bet. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, this is awesome. Thank you, Chris.
Great.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to be together again for a primetime special on the other gigantic court case Trump is facing. You can see not just me, Lawrence, and Rachel, but of course our good friends Alex Wagner, Joy Reid, Ari Melber, Stephanie Ruhle. We'll be all together as Trump stares down what could be his biggest court loss to date. Our expert legal team is here to break all that down next. So earlier today, D.C. Court of Appeals unanimously ruled that Donald Trump is not immune from criminal prosecution for his attempt to steal the 2020 election. The 57-page opinion by 3 judges, 2 appointed by President Joe Biden, 1 by President George H.W. Bush, is so thorough and painstaking it doesn't leave a ton of wiggle room or outstanding legal questions. But there are new questions about what this all means and, crucially, what might happen next at what pace. Here to work through all that, Harry Litman, former U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Department of Justice. Joyce Vance is a former U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Alabama. Katie Fang served as a prosecutor in the State Attorney's Office in Florida's Miami-Dade County and is, of course, now the host of The Katie Fang Show, which airs Saturdays at noon here on MSNBC. And Lisa Rubin here at the table, former litigator, now an MSNBC legal analyst. All right, so I've got this sort of power team here, and I'm going to basically say we'll stipulate on the merits of this opinion, which is thorough and good and basically gets it right. I think we sort of all agree. I think we all thought that going in. The big question is these procedural questions going forward. So let me start with you, Lisa, at the table here about what does specifically the D.C. court hand the Supreme Court in terms of this, you have till February 12th and then what?
So the question about what he has until February 12th to do, I think, is a little bit poorly understood right now. He needs to file a motion for a stay pending his petition for cert, which is a petition for Supreme Court review. But that petition for a stay requires 5 votes, not the 4 votes required to review the case. So the whole kit and caboodle here, as it were, is those 5 votes. If he doesn't have that, 4 justices can say, let's review the case. But if there is no stay, then the D.C. Circuit issues the mandate, which is a fancy way of saying it kicks it back down to Judge Chutkan for pretrial proceedings. Right. So absence of stay, Harry, the procedural posture is you could imagine a sort of parallel track. So Tanya Chutkan has the mandate back, which means she's got the football in her hands, right? She has possession of the case and its control. Maybe there's some cert process happening, across the street from the U.S. Capitol, but for the timing purposes, that doesn't matter. The big question is, if he gets a stay, then what?
100%. So first case I ever worked on as a clerk up there, there were 4 votes to grant, but it was a death penalty case. They couldn't get the 5th for a stay, and he was executed. Oh, wow. So the rule of 5 versus rule of 4 matters here. But I think given this case and the topic, I don't think only 4 will vote. Let's say 5 vote for a stay. The first thing that'll happen is it'll be presented to Chief Justice Roberts, who's the circuit judge for the D.C. Circuit. He'll refer it to the court, and they'll decide whether to grant it. They might, in this case, it's unusual, treat Trump's motion for a stay as a petition for cert, especially since Jack Smith has already moved for it. So they could even move more quickly. One thing is certain. If they take the case, it will be an expedited schedule. Nevertheless, it means that they'll have the case till around June, and that translates into trial back in Judge Chutkan's around September in the very heat of the election, which will give rise to other legal challenges. If they deny, and if you put a gun to my head, my best guess is they will deny, then it's back with Judge Chutkan by June or so.
Okay. Joyce, do you think they're going to deny?
I think it's a tough call, Chris. I can find an awful lot of ways to get to 4 on this court for a lot of different reasons. And I think the best we can do is say that sometimes our crystal balls are faulty and we have to wait and see what happens. One of the problems, though, and I think Harry gets precisely at this, is that if the court does hear it, let's say even that the liberal wing of the court feels like this is an issue that the courts have never decided before, it's important to have their stamp on this issue about presidential immunity, an opinion could be delayed if there are dissents, and the dissenters could take their time. On the other hand, if the court is single-minded in its purpose here, it's possible that they could expedite and turn out a quick decision. They did it in Bush v. Gore, the election contest in Florida. They did it in Watergate. Ultimately, this is up to the whims of the justices.
Right. And Katie, the justices here being 9 individuals, and the whims meaning counting to 5 of those 4. But then also the question of, like, the degree to which people who are not in the majority can delay. I mean, that's sort of the question, too, to me, is, like, if you get the case and you schedule expedited arguments, again, it's all the clock at this point. And then, there's no, I mean, my wife clerked at the court, and I know people that have and been around the court a bit. Yeah. Basically the clock is ticking for the last day in June for that they release arguments is basically the one deadline. And the big cases are always on the last day. Maybe they go into July once in a while. I don't know if they ever have, but that's about it. You go into like July 1st. And then to Harry's point, like if your job is to delay and you want to delay, you just want to delay for whatever reason, you could probably get this to the end of June, right?
Yeah, so it's pretty convoluted, and you and I and the rest of this panel could spend hours talking about the different iterations of how this could play out. But the reason why I think that SCOTUS is going to take it, Chris, is even the circuit court in its opinion noted that this is an issue of first impression. And any Supreme Court is going to want to take an issue of first impression, put its imprimatur on it, and make sure that it's the final word, especially to be able to put to bed and to rest any other defenses raised by Donald Trump and other jurisdictions as to presidential immunity. So in this instance, I think that they're going to take it. Now, all of that being said, to Joyce's point, there is a way by which this can be addressed more quickly than waiting to get something by the end of June. And frankly, we, as members of a judiciary, or the members of America that have a judiciary, they're not bound by the idea that because there's a presidential election in November, that necessarily, means that you cannot begin a trial and continue it, Chris. You could start it and have it go. And not to mention the fact that Trump has other cases, right? So this is not the end all be all when it comes to a trial calendar for Donald Trump.
I mean, my own feeling, this is me talking as a citizen, basically, about a country I love, which is basically that there's just it's just this obvious, enormously important matter of public import in both directions. I keep saying this, but I don't mean it disingenuously. It's not like this has to happen so you can get Trump. If the man is innocent of the crimes that he has been accused of, voters are entitled to that knowledge. They're entitled to know every direction, obviously, before entrusting him to take office again, particularly if he's not knocked off the ballot under the arguments that are going to happen on Thursday. And so my feeling, I guess, Lisa, is like, we start to get into dangerous timing territory if the court grants cert. Like, it to me becomes a genuine open question. Does the trial happen for Election Day?
I think it is a genuine open question. And though I'd like to believe, as Harry said earlier, that if the court grants cert, it will do so on an expedited basis, there's the possibility that it doesn't do so, that it pulls what I would call like a Dobbs maneuver, right? Where they agree to hear the case, but because of concerns about election interference, they hold off on even agreeing to hear the case for some period of months, don't even hear it until the next term. That's what I call the Gerstein scenario.
That would be so outrageous.
It would be.
And cynical, and such a violation of their democratic commitment. Like, I can't believe they would be that bad. And yet, this is the court that agreed to hear the Dobbs case and didn't tell anybody, and on the public docket said they were still considering it. So yes, I'm being cynical now, but this is a court that gives me cause to be cynical. Very quickly, that's the worst case scenario, I think. Harry, your gut says they find a way not to grant cert and they don't grant the stay?
Right. Well, that would be the same thing. But a very important point. You're right. The hubris of them says they'd want to take it, but their desire not to be responsible for the election is very strong, even in their own selfish interests on the other side. So you have to weigh both of those, even if you have a craven view of the Supreme Court.
All right, Harry Litman, Joyce Vance, Katie Fang, and Lisa Rubin. What a great group. Thank you all. Really appreciate it. Silicon Congressman Adam Schiff joins me on what the D.C. court ruling means for the health of our democracy, plus what comes next after today's spectacular Republican failure in the House. Next. It has been almost 150 years since the House impeached a cabinet member. It's only happened once, and that was for a sprawling Reconstruction-era kickback scheme that there were dozens of witnesses who could testify to the details of. Tonight, House Republicans tried to do it for only the second time in American history and just failed, fell on their faces, spectacularly, stunningly. They called a vote to impeach Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas, again, for nothing in particular other than their objections to his policy and the Biden policies on the border. It was a complete political stunt in an election year, and still, somehow the Republican majority screwed up their own whip count.
On this vote, the yeas are 214 and the nays are 216. The resolution is not adopted.
Congressman Adam Schiff of California was the lead manager for the first impeachment of Donald Trump. He served on the January 6th committee. He's also a candidate for Senate in 2024, and he joins me now. Congressman, I think when I covered Congress between, 2007 and 2011, there was one bill that failed on the House that the majority wanted. That was TARP, which is a huge deal, right? Post-bailout, you probably remember it was a big deal when it failed. I feel like they do this every few months now. I just don't understand what they're doing. How did this happen today?
It is really baffling. The number one rule of being speaker is know how to count. Know how to count. And the fact they would bring this up, something as potentially consequential as an impeachment of a cabinet official, and not have counted their votes is really inexplicable. But then the whole conduct of their impeachment proceedings against Joe Biden, against Secretary Mayorkas, it's basically been impeachment proceedings in search of a subject. They wanted to impeach Biden, but they couldn't come up with any evidence. The highly publicized image of Chairman Comer, Republican chairman, with his hand over his head with basically a face plant, is a great metaphor for their entire conduct of this Congress, and in particular impeachment proceedings. But having failed to come up with anything on Joe Biden, they said, well, who else can we impeach? And they settled on Ale Mayorkas, and even they couldn't do that. Next week, I think we're going to impeach a ham sandwich, and who knows where this is going to end.
It does look like there's some notion that Steve Scalise, who is missing today, I think for medical procedures, will be returned tomorrow. I think they're going to take this vote again. I think they probably will have the votes tomorrow, although you never know with Republican House leadership. What's the consequence here? I mean, this does not happen. It's been 150 years since this happened. And the last guy, William Belknap, was caught basically red-handed, clearly committing high crimes and misdemeanors. What does it mean for the country for them to do this if they can pull it off tomorrow?
It's another norm broken. It's another abuse of congressional process, which ought to be the most serious process, and that is to remove someone from office through impeachment. So essentially, they're going to turn this into yet another political tool. As I said on the House floor, hey, when you find evidence that a cabinet official or the president has withheld money from an ally at war to extort them to help you cheat an election or led an insurrection against our government, then impeach them. But until you do, stop wasting everybody's time. I think what they will do and are doing is lowering the bar. Essentially the way they have with censure, the way they have with expulsion and other things, to basically say, we're going to use these political tools whenever we find it useful. And that is just damaging to the institution.
You know, the president, who, as you know, lost his case before the D.C. Court of Appeals today about immunity, he has this to say, and I think it relates actually to impeachment, right, which is to use these processes as explicit partisan weapons and to complain about them being used as explicit partisan weapons so that you can do the same, right? So that you can create that as a sort of baseline of normal behavior. He says if immunity is not granted to a president, every president leaves office will be immediately indicted by the opposing party. Without complete immunity, a president of the United States would not be able to properly function, which, as I said earlier in the program, that reads to me like a threat, basically. How does it sound to you?
It does sound like a threat. And here's the thing about today, and I think the significance of this ruling. First, it shouldn't be a hard decision. It really wasn't a hard decision for the Court of Appeals. As they pointed out in their opinion, the ultimate check on a presidency is being able to vote them out of office. And if you could commit crimes to prevent being thrown out of office, then there is no check left in the Constitution. This was not a hard decision, even for the Republican-appointed Court of Appeals judge in this case. It should not, and I think will not be a hard decision for the Supreme Court. But the rub is the one you discussed earlier, and that is, do they delay so that this gets pushed into next year when Trump could, if he were successful in the election, make the whole thing go away? Or do they do their duty and deny cert or take it up and move quickly? I have confidence that even this terrible reactionary court on the merits is not going to say the president is above the law, but I'm less confident that they will act with any kind of alacrity. It may be their subterfuge to essentially draw this out and once again let Donald Trump deny justice by delaying justice.
Congressman Adam Schiff, Democratic California, thank you very much.
Thank you.
David Plouffe was a campaign manager for President Obama's 2008 presidential run, then served as a senior advisor to the president. He joins me now. How are you?
Chris, good to see you.
So, there's a few things that I feel like I have a good read on the politics of, like abortion rights right now. It's pretty clear. It just shows up election after election, day to day. I also think the polling has shown American voters are not going to be psyched to vote for a man as a major party nominee for president if he is convicted of federal crimes in an election year. That seems pretty clear as well. But everything short of that, I don't know. What do you think?
Well, it's just a cluster. And so I think, to make the Republicans and Trump pay full political price for that come next fall, you're going to have to build a campaign around this, which is if you elect these people, they'll be incompetent. More than that, Trump's just going to be focused on vindictiveness, settling scores. It won't do anything to help your bottom line, your paycheck, your health care. So even look, the border deal, I thought Biden's speech was strong today. But, that's not even like the first batter in the first inning. You got to stay at it because most people going to decide this election are paying zero attention to what happens in Washington. So you got to feed it to them and feed it to them and feed it to them. But at the end of the day, I think that now Trump's got a huge lead over Biden on the border. So I don't think we can expect Biden to get that to even. Right. But if you can make some progress on it and people look like Trump is just completely full of it, I think there's some potential political benefit there.
Okay, so there was this border deal that was negotiated for 4 months, bipartisan group of senators. Trump comes out, kills it, and it's endorsed by a bunch of conservatives. The Border Patrol Union comes out for it. Wall Street Journal today, editorial board. I guess my question is, so there's two ways to think about this with Mike Yorks. Like they clearly, the way you generally think about this is issue salience, right? You want to raise issue salience on issues you have an advantage of, right? You want people talking about the border, not abortion, if you're Republicans. So the question then becomes at the Democratic side is like, how do you deal with that? They're impeaching Mayorkas to raise the salience. Can you jujitsu this somehow so that you're not just basically raising the salience of an issue you're losing?
Well, I think you can. And listen, having been through campaigns, you've got a set of issues, maybe character, where you've got an advantage, but you're not on offense. You don't have the ball all the time. So you got to play defense, too. Right. So I think immigration is a very salient issue with voters, and not just on the hard right. So I think Biden now and Democrats generally have the ability to say, listen, this has been a big problem for a long time. Trump actually made it worse. We actually had a bunch of solutions that would have given us a chance, and because he said he didn't want to help Biden. And by the way, that's what he'll do when he's president. He's not going to be focused on solving a single problem for anyone in this country, but creating problems for his political enemies. So I think that's a way potentially where it also gives Biden and Democrats an answer. Every time they're asked by a reporter or a voter about the border, they can say, we had a set of solutions, by the way, with a lot of Republicans on board, and Trump killed it.
Right. What do you think about the sort of unpredictability into the political calendar of the possibility of these trials. Like, what is it? I mean, no one's ever dealt with this, but like, I don't know, if he goes on trial in September, I don't know. I mean, my gut says don't overthink it, Chris. It's not good for him if he goes on trial. That would be my sense. Yeah, right. But then I don't know. Sometimes I read the polling, or I'm just like, wow, man, I don't know.
It's unprecedented. I will say this, and I may be wrong about this, but I think it will help him with turnout. I think it will hurt him with swing voters, if we're talking about a fall. And so that's the math, that comes into play here. So I think at the end of the day, if you're the Biden campaign, you just have to control what you can control. You can't control the timing of this.
Do you think, short of trial, any of this stuff penetrates? Or is it the job? I mean, one of the sort of default beliefs of the kind of political class of Democratic consultants is that everyone has already priced in this guy. You got to run on other stuff and let hisness do its thing. And I'm not quite sold on that. I actually think people have really forgotten who he is, and I think you actually do have to attack him.
I'm not sold on that at all.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example from 2008. Barack Obama was universally known. What we found in the general election against McCain is if we stopped running biography in any market, our number slipped. You always have to remind people, okay? And so that's the way to...
great example.
Yeah, you got to raise the stakes.
Who's that guy again?
Because I think at the end of the day, we can talk about abortion and health care and foreign policy, all important. I think this is going to come down to enough people say, I can't do it again. And with Trump. And that's not going to happen on its own. Yeah, you got to put it in front of people.
And you got to remember what the first time was like, which people have blocked out, understandably, because it's unpleasant to think about. David Plouffe, as always, good pleasure to have you here. Before we go, special programming note about tomorrow night. I will be back here at 7 p.m. for a special hour previewing what to expect when the Supreme Court hears arguments on whether the insurrection clause in the 14th Amendment means that Trump is ineligible to be on that ballot. That's a special Supreme Court preview at 7 p.m. tomorrow before an hour of regular All In, which I will also be hosting. And then on Thursday, we're going to have the oral arguments that morning. That evening, the whole MSNBC primetime gang will be here for a special night of coverage hosted by Rachel Maddow. Be sure to tune in for that, too. That does it for All In. You can catch us every weeknight at 8 o'clock on MSNBC. Don't forget to like us on Facebook. That's facebook.com/allinwithchris.